Hello, my name's Jason Kennedy and I'm here to tell you about the Melco S10 switch for Hi-Fi Plus magazine. The S10 is Melco's flagship network switch. It costs £1, under £5,000, and as you can see, it's a 2-box unit. The head unit contains the ports and all the processing, signal processing, whereas the unit below is the power supply, which is based on a toroidal transformer. It's a linear power supply, and the two units can be used just as you see them or side by side. Probably side by side is the best sounding option if the space is available. The S10 builds upon Melco's S100 switch, which was a single box unit that looked identical to this. It has upgraded components compared to that switch, and obviously the separate power supply, in my experience, sounds considerably better, or allows a streaming system to sound considerably better than the more affordable unit. It's pretty ambitious, to say the least, really. Even obviously the price point is ambitious, but it takes into account the fact that the network switch is a critical part of any streaming system, and in many cases an underestimated or underappreciated part of any streaming system. It's the gatekeeper. It keeps the noise out of the audio circuitry. That's its job, essentially, is to stop the mountains of noise that are circulating on all internet connected networks from polluting the signal that we hear, that we reproduce, and that we use the best possible DACs, amplifiers and loudspeakers to enjoy. That enjoyment is limited by how much noise is coming into the system. Unlike CD, streaming systems pretty well have to be network connected. Not even, I mean, if you're streaming from Tidal or Cobuzz, obviously that's the case, but even if you're streaming from your own server, you have to have some kind of a means of controlling it, which is pretty well always by a mobile device, iPad, phone. It connects to the system wirelessly, but the Wi-Fi receiver, the router, connects to the system by Ethernet or wirelessly, but for best results, Ethernet is the preferred route. It's the most reliable and theoretically and in practice gives the best sound. The S10 head unit has 2 banks of 4 Ethernet ports with a switchable lighting. The LED lights can be switched on and off with this small button here, and Melco recommends that you switch them off apart from the times when you're trying to establish that something's connected. LEDs, especially those that blink, tend to inject noise into the system. Therefore, the fewer of them that are on, the better. There is a single light at the front to let you know the whole system is on, but that's literally all you need. There are 2 banks of 4. So these ones on this side are 100 megabyte per second, whereas these are a gigabyte per second data rate. And the audio components should be connected to this. Essentially, that's the streamer or the server. If the server, for instance, has a streaming output, a USB output, that should be connected to this side. If you're using it just to serve the music files to a streamer, Melco suggests you connect it to this faster gigabyte side. Likewise, this is where you connect the router, any PCs, any other components that aren't part of the signal path, essentially. Basically they try and separate them. They do separate them. Melco separates the two because audio streaming doesn't require high speeds, whereas other elements in the network do. These two ports here are SFP optical ports for connection to streamers that have an optical input, of which there aren't a great deal, but fibre optic connections have the advantage of being galvanically isolated, so in theory you shouldn't get so much noise via that connection. However, practice doesn't always bear this out, and a well constructed Ethernet cable can often compete with an optical connection. The question of course is, why spend so much money on a network switch when you can just connect your streamer directly to a cheap peripheral switch? You know, a £50 4-port or 8-port switch will do the job in terms of getting the signal to the streamer. However, it's become clearer and clearer over the last 5-10 years that noise is the enemy of good sound with streaming audio. It's the reason why streaming systems sound digital. It's the reason why streaming systems don't necessarily sound as good as CD players when they have so many intrinsic advantages. There's no optical disc reading, no real-time disc reading going on. The resolution of the files can be considerably higher. The reasons why streaming should sound better are many, and in practice they're usually borne out, but not to the extent that many would hope. It's been a sort of steep learning curve for manufacturers and enthusiasts alike to establish what really matters with streaming audio, and it's becoming clearer and clearer that noise is the main limiting factor, the reason why streaming systems don't perform as well as they should. The noise itself comes from other devices on the network, which is not limited to your home. It's limited to, one would hope, your local sort of area, everything up to the junction box, which can of course be hundreds or thousands of devices, televisions, telephones. Any network device can inject noise into the network. This noise often comes from switch mode power supplies, cheap switch mode power supplies, and it can also be picked up from the air. It's a radio frequency interference. So it's a combination of electromagnetic interference and radio frequency interference that all gets picked up by the network and all gets into the system, unless you have a switch that is designed to eliminate it, to minimize it, to let only the good stuff get to the audio system and keep the bad stuff out. In many ways, the network switch is the weakest link in any streaming system, mainly because we tend to think of it as being a peripheral, a sort of less important part, but its job is critical, really. If you let noise into the system, that noise is going to be reproduced by the loudspeakers, by the DAC, by the amplifier, and it's going to get in the way. And it tends to make the sound more obviously digital, so to speak, colder, more clinical, less relaxed. And using this, the S10 in my system had the opposite effect. It made the system it made the sound warmer, more natural, more relaxed, easier, and distinctly more analog. I was quite surprised by the extent to which it did this. It was tantamount to a serious DAC upgrade or a serious streamer upgrade. Obviously you need a decent streamer and DAC, or both two in one, to appreciate this, but I don't think you need a particularly extreme example. If you're spending £5,000 on your streamer and DAC, you will appreciate the benefits that a switch of this quality can deliver. It basically brings a calm, sort of natural, effortless quality to the sound produced by the system. It makes other switches, admittedly more affordable switches, sound crude and ineffectual when it comes to the job of keeping noise out. It's sort of distinctly Japanese in its the character it brings to the sound. It makes it easier, smoother, and more relaxed and natural, but in a revealing way. It's not smoothing off the sound, it's just taking the noise away so that the signal, especially the quieter parts of the signal, which are often buried in the noise floor, can be heard. And it's these quiet elements that give you the clues about the space in which a recording is made, the nature of the reverb that's been applied to an instrument or a voice. It's quite critical, really, that you can hear, or being able to hear, the quietest sounds in a mix is the difference between it sounding realistic and natural and it sounding hard and edgy and cold. It gives you the impression, a very strong impression, of hearing everything. Obviously you can never hear everything, but the fact that you can hear, you get a sense of the space in which the recording has been made. If it's a natural acoustic recording, you get a very clear sense of that. The imaging is phenomenal, in terms of scale, in terms of depth, in terms of the sort of solidity of sounds of instruments and voices. They all sound much more real. They feel, there's a sort of reach out and touch it quality to them that you don't get with streamers that are compromised by, switches that let too much noise through. Because that seems to have noise, as well as covering up the quiet details, has a sort of compressing effect. It makes it seem as though there's not so much depth, there's not so much space, and that there's not so much nuance in the way music is being played, or the way individual singers or musicians are expressing themselves. The most dramatic illustration of how effective this switch was delivered when I was using the Key 3 BXT loudspeaker system, which is a active digital speaker system that you just send a digital signal to, and it is extremely explicit. It's a monitor in the full sense of the word. It's sort of designed to show absolutely everything, which means that if you haven't got everything right in front of it, i.e. the streamer, the DAC, the switch, the power supplies, the supports, etc., if there are limitations there, you hear them. So you put something like this in, and suddenly it's sort of, you really are there. I was quite blown away by the results with this and the Key 3s. When any system worth its salt, any decent revealing streaming system will benefit, but something like that, it's real next level stuff. It's not subtle at all. So the Melco S10 may seem expensive. It is expensive, but in the context of a high-end system, it's pretty much essential to have a really good network switch, if you're streaming, of course. If you have a sort of basic switch, you really aren't hearing half of what the system can do, because you're hearing so much noise being reproduced with the music. It's not clear that it's noise, it just limits how quiet a sound you can hear, and that limits the realism of the system. So in conclusion, I would say, in any decent streaming system, this thing is worth its salt. Thank you.